Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm pleased to be here with Mickey Amery, Alberta's Minister of Justice, to announce changes to the way our elections work in the province. I believe democracy thrives when people trust the process. They need to know that they can take part in a simple and easily accessible process. They need to be confident in and to trust the election results. And they need to know where financial support for candidates and parties comes from. So we are introducing Bill 54, which is the Election Statutes Amendment Act, to make elections at every level in Alberta more transparent and democratic. If passed, the use of electronic tabulators and other automated voting machines would be eliminated, requiring all ballots to be counted by hand to protect election integrity. The unofficial vote counts will be required to be complete within 12 hours of polls closing to provide timely, reliable results, ensuring Albertans receive fast and accurate election results. The practice of vouching at voting stations, where a voter without identification could simply have their identity vouched for and verified by another eligible voter, will end. Our government has made a commitment to restore public confidence in identification and voter eligibility verification processes through the elimination of vouching. We are expanding access to special ballots to improve voting accessibility and to protect voter privacy. These changes would allow any voter to request a special ballot without needing to provide a reason, and allow special ballots to be sent overseas or to remote locations earlier. And we're protecting integrity by requiring voters to personally request their special ballot. Voters will also be required to vote in their constituency of residence or by special ballot. These changes will ensure that all Albertans have ample opportunity to have their say at election time, and that Alberta's elections are open, secure, and accessible. We are expanding opportunities for Albertans to be involved in direct democracy by making changes to the threshold needed for successful citizens' initiatives. The signature collection time for citizens' initiatives will be extended from 90 days to 120 days. We are also improving the process by setting the threshold to be 10% of the number of eligible voters who participated in the last general election, as opposed to being either 10 or 20% of total registered voters. Additional amendments will update rules to make it easier for Albertans to hold their elected officials accountable through MLA recall. These changes would extend the recall signature collection time from 60 days to 90 days and lower the signature threshold to be 60% of the total number of electors who voted in the electoral district in the most recent election, as opposed to 40% of the total number of electors in the riding. Recall legislation and citizens' initiatives give Albertans more ways to be directly involved in democracy and to have their say on issues that matter to them. There are many more changes in the proposed bill, and Minister Mickey Amery will provide more details about exactly what they cover. But our intent is clear. Democracy is the foundation of our freedoms and the source of legitimacy for governments at every level. It must be protected, strengthened, and defended, and that's exactly what we are doing. We want to make it simple as possible for every Albertan to express their political views and safeguard the system that enables them to do it. These changes build on the integrity, trust, and openness that have always been at the heart of democracy and keep Alberta strong and free. And with that, I would like to ask Minister Amery to take over.
Well, thank you, Premier, and good afternoon to members of the media and all of those watching. Today in the House, I will be tabling Bill 54, the Election Statutes Amendment Act, that will make amendments to several pieces of legislation that govern democratic processes in this province. Reviewing elections-related legislation to strengthen public trust in the integrity of our elections is one of my mandate items from the Premier. These proposed amendments result from a review of our democratic process legislation. This review revealed opportunities to make changes that will ensure our democratic processes are fair, free, and transparent. This includes provincial elections, Senate elections, referendums, and citizen initiative petitions. As the Premier mentioned, we are strengthening public trust in elections by eliminating the use of electronic tabulators, ending the practice of vouching, and making amendments that will make the process of voting even easier for Albertans. Through Bill 54, we are strengthening the role of scrutineers so that they can observe every aspect of the electoral process. Political parties will be able to begin and participate in judicial recounts, and we will prevent a single official agent from acting on behalf of more than one independent candidate. Municipal councillors and school board trustees will also be required to take an unpaid leave of absence when running for provincial office. Albertans expect free and fair elections, and that's exactly what we intend to deliver on. Through Bill 54, we're also making a number of amendments to election finance rules. Contributions from Alberta corporations and unions will be allowed, and existing legislated reporting requirements will apply to ensure that candidates are fully transparent about where their campaign dollars are coming from. To recognize the increased cost of campaigning, amendments would also adjust party and candidate expense limits. This includes adopting a maximum election expense limit of $5 million per registered political party and increasing the maximum election expense limit per registered candidate to $75,000. And for third-party advertisers, we will reduce the maximum limit on contributions to third-party advertisers to ensure that political action is led by Albertans rather than by outside influences. Third-party advertisers will also be required to indicate if they support or oppose a referendum question or questions under the Referendum Act to increase clarity for Albertans when deciding how to vote in a referendum. We'll also be making it easier for Albertans to vote in a constitutional referendum by allowing mail-in ballots to apply to these referendums. Like special ballots, this is one more way that we're providing flexibility for Albertans. As part of this government's review of democratic process legislation, we considered recommendations from the former chief electoral officer in his report into the 2021 Senate election and referendum. In response to that report's recommendations, Bill 54 proposes changes that would improve voting in Senate elections and referendums. This includes improving access to voting in First Nations and Métis settlements during referendums and Senate elections. All Albertans who are eligible to vote should have consistent and equal access to voting, and now the Chief Electoral Officer would conduct votes held in conjunction with municipal elections. As I've already mentioned, the government is introducing Bill 54 in response to my mandate to review our legislation and recommend changes to strengthen public trust in our democratic processes. These proposed changes are intended to give Albertans confidence that our democratic processes are fair, consistent, and transparent for all. Introducing these proposed changes this spring will give Elections Alberta, political parties, prospective candidates, and other participants time to understand and implement any changes that they need, any changes that pass into law, before the next election. Albertans rightly expect their government to make sure that democratic processes are fair so that all Albertans can continue to participate and trust in our democratic processes. Thank you, and with that, we'll take questions.
Thank you, Minister. Just a reminder for those in the room and on the phones that this press conference and information shared regarding the legislation are under embargo until the legislation is tabled later today. We'll start off with questions here in the room before going on to the phones. As
about the election, are they embargoed?
if it doesn't pertain to the legislation, then not under embargo. So yeah, we'll go with one question, one follow-up per usual, starting off here in the room and then onto the phones. If I could get a show of hands for those with questions in the room. We'll go to Emmanuel and then we'll go to James.
Question for Premier Smith about last night's election result. This morning you wrote that Albertans will have an opportunity to discuss our province's future, assess options for strengthening our province against future hostile acts, and choose a path forward. What's that path forward? Because you have taken a lot of measures in the recent years against Ottawa, against the Liberal environment and energy measures. You've adopted an Alberta Sovereignty Act. Like, what's next?
Well, I look at it a little bit differently. The federal government has taken hostile actions against Alberta and against the Constitution and against our right to develop our resources. And every action we have taken has been to reassert that the Constitution matters, the division of powers matters. And so I, at the very beginning of the campaign, said whoever got elected, I would expect them to address the 9 offensive pieces of legislation and policy that prevent us from being able to exercise our constitutional jurisdiction to develop our resources. We want to see a guaranteed access to economic corridors that include pipelines to get to new markets. We want the repealing of Bill C-69 so that we do not have an unending process for approvals that essentially means no more pipelines can be built. We need to lift the tanker ban off the BC coast. We need to eliminate the oil and gas emissions cap that has been proposed, which is a production cap. We need to scrap the so-called clean electricity regulations. We need to end the treatment of plastics as toxic. We need to abandon the net zero car mandate. We need to return oversight of the industrial carbon tax fully to provincial jurisdiction. And we need to halt the federal censorship of energy companies. I mean, this is all very reasonable requests. And so I put that on the table. I know that the opposition leader said that they were very reasonable. Prime Minister Carney, it's a little unclear. And so I'm going to work over the next 6 months to try to get those things addressed. Because if it is the case that that there's a consensus now about getting our energy to market, getting our resources to market, finding new markets, these are kind of the baseline to reset the relationship with Alberta.
And so you mentioned those 9 propositions that you want them to move forward with. As far as I know, Carney has a soft commitment to 2 of them about the energy corridors and an even softer one about the emissions cap. And yet, 28% of Albertans vote for him. So how do you reconcile that? And what do you say to Albertans who voted for a party that opposes what you think are Alberta's crucial interests?
I'll tell you what I think. I think that over 300 MPs got elected because they stood on a platform to get our resources developed, to work with provinces to establish economic corridors, and to get our products to market. I think the NDP got crushed, the Greens got crushed, and the Bloc Québécois lost ground because they were opposed to that agenda. And so I would hope that the current Prime Minister understands that his mandate comes from moderate voters who actually want this province to be a genuine energy superpower and the country to be a genuine energy superpower. And so that's why I believe we saw the outcome that we got last night. It wasn't because they doubled down on extremist environmental policies that would crush our industry. It was the opposite. They depicted themselves as wanting to create a new approach, one that would be in sync with what all the provinces are asking for, and that's what I'll be asking the Prime Minister to do.
Perfect, thanks. And we'll go to James.
Yeah, Premier, it's the day after a federal election, and this press release uses the word referendum or referendums, I think around 6 times. So is this something you're considering? And if so, what's the timing?
Well, we would have introduced this legislation a little bit earlier. We've been working on it, had a few final tweaks to make. We were going to introduce it regardless of what the outcome of the election was. It just so happens that this is the timing now that we're back from a week from constituency break. We knew that there were just some tweaks that we needed to make in certain areas. We had made promises about how we would revise some of the elections laws, and so it's just a matter of making sure that we're bringing that, just making those commitments. It's the timing is just what the timing is. We were always intending to bring this forward.
Great. And do you trust the outcome of the federal election?
Yes,
And
because they don't have tabulators, and they don't have vote anywhere machines, and we got the results before we went to bed last night. That is an example of why it is we need to make some of these changes, is to bring it more in sync with what we saw last night.
Graham and then Lisa.
Premier, you had some strong words in favor of Pierre Poilievre in your statement. He did win more seats, he won more votes, but he lost his own seat in Carleton. So should he stay on as the leader of the federal Conservative?
I think he should stay on, and I've told him so. I think that he can find another riding where it may be a little bit easier to be able to win. I think that the people who won last night, I think that they will all agree that they won because of the efforts of the leader of the party. He just didn't spend as much time in his home riding to secure the win back home, but I don't see any reason why he shouldn't stay on.
And a follow-up on that issue about what happened in the election with Mr. Poilievre. Of course, he lost his own seat, and he did not win the election. Do you take any responsibility for what happened last night? Because you have comments, for example, to Breitbart News that he was more in sync with the Americans where they were headed under Donald Trump. Do you take any responsibility for having hobbled or undermined the Conservative campaign with your comments?
I don't think I was in the media in the last 2 weeks. I was traveling. the vote solidified over the last 2 weeks. So whatever happened over the last 2 weeks, I would say, was the result of the campaigning of the federal parties. I had no interest in being on the ballot at the federal level. Those were issues Canadians had to decide, and they decided.
And we'll go to Lisa and then to Shay.
I've got a specific question about this bill. If this passes, we would be removing the requirement for a referendum to occur before the Legislative Assembly makes a resolution authorizing an amendment to the Constitution of Canada. Why are we doing this? What are you targeting here? Is this about trying to get out of the equalization program? What exactly is being targeted here?
Well, I think the idea is that moving quickly, recognizing that Albertans have important issues that they'd like to be heard, and having the opportunity to have those referendum take shape quickly is important to us, and that's part of the reason why we're making these changes. It's entirely appropriate to provide the sort of the rules, the rules around a citizen initiative, and where one is successful, to do everything that we can to make sure that the Albertans have an opportunity as quickly as possible to review the question and make a decision about that.
But you're not explaining why you're doing that. What is it in the Constitution that you want to change, which you can't unilaterally change the Constitution anyway? So I'm confused about why this is here. What is it that you're trying to enable the government to be able to change in the Constitution?
Well,
Can you give me just like one
Your
specific example?
question was about whether or not the Legislative Assembly would or should be able to contemplate a decision on whether or not we move forward on a constitutional question. And the answer to that is that Albertans deserve to have a question put to them as quickly as possible, where they meet the rules under the Act, under the Citizen Initiative Act, as quickly as possible without interference from the Legislative Assembly. I hope that helps answer your question.
But without a referendum.
Well, no, with a
with the
referendum,
referendum.
with the referendum, we just
It
eliminate,
removes the requirement for referendum.
removes the legislative step, the legislative. Let's, as a for instance, I've agreed with Quebec that we should be able to appoint judges at the provincial level. I think that might be, I don't know if that is a constitutional requirement, that might require a constitutional amendment. And so if it is the case that we have the premiers get together and identify a number of constitutional changes that we think would benefit us, being able to put those directly to the people would be the kind of thing to do, as opposed to waiting for the legislative session. Because as you know, we only sit 3 months in the spring and 1 month in the fall, and that just gives more flexibility to take an issue and put it directly to the people for affirmation.
Gotcha. I'm gonna go to Shay and then Catherine. I'll either come to the phones or to you guys.
Yeah, just following up on some of my colleagues' questions, the word referendum mentioned several times throughout this legislation. Just wondering, into the Premier, those 9 demands that you outlined, I think within 6 months you said you wanted to see some action on them. What if you don't see that action? What then? And is the door open to a referendum on separation?
Well, I live in hope. I mean, the very first conversation I had with Justin Trudeau when I got elected was to talk about how we could align around a reasonable timeline for an emissions reduction target that wouldn't devastate our industry. And my very first conversation with Prime Minister Carney was the same thing. And I'm going to have a renewed conversation with him about that. And so he's given the impression, certainly with the interactions he's had with me and the Council of the Federation, that he is open to establishing economic corridors that include pipelines. And I have to believe that if you're intending to create more markets, build more pipelines, you will need to have oil and gas to fill them. So you cannot have policy that suppresses the development of resources at the same time as you're trying to expand the development of resources. So we'll have a very interesting conversation over the next 6 months. I don't want to prejudge the outcome, but that's what we'll be advocating for.
This morning's statement, I mean, you're talking about hope and optimism in your answer just now, but this morning there was words like hostile and protecting the province. I guess how optimistic are you about the relationship with the new Prime Minister? Are you feeling hopeful that this could be a new relationship between Alberta and Ottawa?
Well, very much depends. I mean, we had a cabinet that he went into the election with that was exactly the same as the cabinet that subjected Alberta to 10 years of economic devastation. So whether or not he, as a leader, is going to be able to change course remains to be seen. He's given some undertakings, but he said different things in different forms to different people in different parts of the country. So I don't know the answer yet. I made it very clear what I think he needs to do to reset the relationship with Alberta. I think what we put on the table is very reasonable and very much in sync with the idea of being an energy superpower and finding new markets. And I guess the ball will be in his court to see how he responds to that.
Thanks.
Yeah,
And Catherine?
Catherine. Yeah, so the legislation very specifically mentions the Alberta Taxpayer Protection Act when we're talking about that exemption of the requirement of the legislature. What kind of questions are you anticipating? What is on the table that the Taxpayer Protection Act needs to be exempted from that process?
The idea is that every single question will need to be put towards a referendum, and we're not going to make any sort of concessions in that area. Everything that needs to be put forward will have to be put forward as a referendum question within the parameters that the Act defines.
And in another section of the Act, this is something that came up during the RCMP's investigation of the UCP in leadership races. These changes would permit people to buy party memberships for a spouse or other family. It does not require their consent, and there's no dispute mechanism. So let's say my husband wanted to buy an NDP membership so he could cast 2 ballots for Nenshi in the leadership review. I would have no way of saying unacceptable. So who was asking for this and why?
Well, I think generally speaking, families typically have these conversations amongst each other, and they work together. They talk about where their political views are leaning towards. They look to talk and discuss important issues of the day together. We'd like to think that that happens in most families, if not all. And certainly having the ability to, for one individual to purchase a membership for a spouse or a child is not intended to indicate or to suggest that there would be some nefarious type of approach. What it was intended to do is allow for one individual in a family to be able to make a purchase, a bulk purchase, if you will, for direct family members when those family members are all in agreement. We don't presuppose that any family member will buy multiple memberships to cast multiple votes for any individual, and we certainly would not suggest that that is appropriate whatsoever. But families typically talk about these things at the dinner table, and they have the opportunity to purchase memberships using one credit card from one individual in the family seems to be the natural way that families typically do this, and I think it's appropriate that we allow them to do that.
To be more direct, we're actually going to hold the NDP to the same strict standard that we have in the UCP. The UCP has always said you can only buy a membership for yourself or a close family member. You can't bulk buy memberships. And so this will ensure that all political parties have to follow that same strict rule in leadership contests.
Thank you. And we're going to take a couple questions from the phones, and then we'll come back to the room if we have time. Operator, could you put through our first caller, please?
Rahim Mohammed with Post Media.
Hello, this question's for the Premier. Madam Premier, do you agree with some of your fellow Conservatives that Premier Doug Ford and Corey Tenike are at least somewhat to blame for the Conservatives falling short in last night's election, given their multiple unsolicited interjections during the campaign?
All I can tell you is I tried to keep myself out of the federal election. I know the media kept on trying to draw me in. I felt that this was an important contest for the leaders of the federal parties to fight out, and they did. I have a relationship with Ontario Premier Doug Ford that is very constructive at the Council of the Federation, and I'm hoping that that continues.
Just a quick follow-up. Does a Liberal victory with the Liberal track record on resource issues and Alberta-Ottawa relations, does that increase the prospect of you calling an early election either sometime before the end of the calendar year or in 2026?
Well, I still have a 2.5-year mandate. Minority governments don't tend to last very long. So it may well be that we're already into an election before I face re-election. So I don't really see any reason to go to an early election.
Thanks, Rahim. Operator, could you put through our next caller, please?
Rick Bell with Post Media.
Good afternoon, Premier. A real simple question. I realize you're not advocating for Alberta separation, separatism, independence, or anything like that, but what is your reaction to the fact that the level of frustration among many Albertans has gotten so strong that some people are at least talking about, thinking about, pondering, debating an option such as leaving Canada. Well, what is your reaction to that?
Well, I think Albertans are hurt and betrayed. That's how I think Albertans are feeling. I think Canada as a whole got a sense of that feeling of hurt and betrayal with the way the Americans are treating us right now. But we've been treated that way for the last 10 years. Treated like our interests don't matter, treated like our economic imperatives aren't important, treated like we should be just shut up and just be satisfied with whatever the central government decides to do, regardless of whether it's constitutional or not. I think that's what you were seeing in this last election. And I think Albertans want to share my view that we want to be able to have Alberta sovereignty within a united Canada. But we also would like to see Team Canada be on Team Alberta for once. And that's what, when I say I live in hope that that's going to happen, it hasn't happened for the last 10 years. And so that's part of the reason why I think Albertans are frustrated. I think that they were hoping for a big change, and they didn't get it last night. So I'm going to do what I can to work with the current government, as I always have, to find areas of common agreement and to try to address those things that have been causing some of that feeling of betrayal and hurt. And hopefully we'll be able to forge a stronger approach with our fellow premiers and a recognition from the federal government that they've got to honor the Constitution.
And my follow-up question is, there's already, an article popped up just as you were speaking about the Bloc Québécois offering to help Carney to stay in office, provided he does certain things, one of which would be, of course, not talking about pipelines going through Quebec as an example. So my question is, how do you feel about the prospect that the Bloc Québécois could, on many issues, prop up the Carney government if it turns out that they are in fact a minority?
Well, I guess the Prime Minister has a choice to make then, because that's not what he got elected on. He got elected on ensuring that we had economic corridors that would be able to get all of our products to market, including oil and gas. And so that's what I would expect to work with the Prime Minister on. And I would expect all the premiers to as well. Let's remember, the Bloc Québécois wants to break the country up. They want to destroy Canada. And so it doesn't surprise me that the opening position of the Bloc leader is to take a position that would be destructive to Canadian unity. So I don't think that Prime Minister Carney should play that game. I think that he should look at the mandate that he got as one to work with the premiers on the communique that we signed before going into the election.
Thank you. And we have time for one, maybe two more questions. We'll go to Global and then, yeah.
When it comes to the legislation and the discussion about referendums, I'm just wondering if you're hoping this does make it easier to put that question towards Albertans about the Sovereignty Act, seeing Alberta separate. Is that the goal here?
When we were talking about looking at the thresholds for both recall and citizen initiative, one of the reasons why we were discussing about changing it is that you want a bar that's high, but you don't want a bar that's impossible to achieve. And we saw with some of the recall initiatives that took place at the municipal level, the bar was impossible to achieve. So we wanted to try to create something that was a little bit more reasonable. And the fact that we haven't seen any citizen-initiated referendum, that also suggested to us that people just thought it was pointless to try to go out and try to get that many signatures. And so we wanted to recalibrate to be able to allow for voters to express an interest. If you've got 10% of your voting public that is concerned about an issue, it's something we should know about. So I don't want to prejudge what kind of issues might come forward. If you look at California, they regularly have propositions. They have 10 or 15 propositions virtually every election campaign. And ultimately, that's what I'd like to get to. I'd like to see a lot more citizen-initiated referenda on issues of importance.
And just following up from a question earlier too, I just want to ask, or directly, is the door still open to Alberta separating? I feel that question wasn't directly answered.
Well, not by me. I believe in Alberta's sovereignty within a united Canada. However, there is a citizen-initiated referenda process that if citizens want to put a question on a ballot and get enough of their fellow citizens to sign that petition, then those questions will be put forward. Again, I don't want to prejudge what a question might be, but not by our government.
Thank you. And Janet, did you still have a question?
please.
Then we'll go to you for our last question.
Okay, so, I mean, you said in March that Alberta would no longer tolerate, those words you used, the treatment from the federal Liberals. So I don't think I have a clear sense of what does not tolerating it look like now?
Well, there's a couple of things it looks like. I mean, we have passed a couple of different motions under our Alberta sovereignty within a United Canada legislation. Very soon, if they do not repeal their net zero power regs, we're going to have to do a call for natural gas power plants to be built in this province so we don't end up in the dark. And so that would be one way that we are just going to say we're not listening to we don't recognize your authority to tell us that we cannot provide reliable power to our people. The other area, of course, was with our emissions legislation. We've made our oil and gas sites critical infrastructure that federal agents cannot go onto without permission. We have taken ownership of emissions data, so the emissions data will be reported to us. And if we have to take more measures to ensure that we retain ownership of our oil and gas so we can actually get it to market, we will. So those are the things that we intend to do. We're going to assert our right under the Constitution to develop our resources, develop our electricity grid for the benefit of Albertans.
So when it comes to the way you've been having diplomatic relations with the U.S., you know, some people might say it's been a unique approach compared to the federal government and the rest of Canada. So how does this election result change the kind of diplomatic approach you're going to be taking with the U.S.?
We've been wanting to have a constructive relationship with the U.S. Keep in mind that virtually all of our oil and gas go to the United States because our neighbors wouldn't let us build pipelines east and west. Let's remember the reality of what we're facing in our country. But also let's demonstrate that with the construction of Trans Mountain and the Coastal GasLink, that has changed a lot for our province, which says to me we need a lot more of it. And so I would say we're going to be looking at the potential to build pipelines south, east, west, and north. And we will see if we're going to meet with a supportive partner at the federal level. The Prime Minister made a lot of supportive comments prior to the election, during the election, and now we'll see whether or not that is the case after the election. But we would, our preference would be for us to provide energy security to Canada first and make sure that we're building pipelines across the country so that Quebec and Ontario don't have to rely on all their energy coming up from America or coming from overseas. Our priority would be to also help our friends in Asia. We have a real advantage, having just come back from Japan and South Korea. We have a real advantage by having pipelines now open up to the West Coast. The Americans don't have that. Americans don't have the ability to serve the Pacific the way we do. If you have to get oil and gas from the Gulf Coast, it takes 55 days to get to Japan. It only takes 8 days to get from Canada. So why don't we take advantage of that opportunity, double down and do more of it? So those are the kind of things that I'll be looking at. And if there is an opportunity as well, once relationship with the United States normalizes with the renegotiated Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, we would be open to having conversations with the United States about expanding more pipeline access down south as well.
Thank you. And that's all the time we have for questions today.
Thanks, everyone.
Folks. Thank you.